She thought she was clever, listing another man's home online as if she owned it. She thought no one would notice, that she could humiliate him and maybe even scare him into leaving the neighborhood. But what this HOA Karen didn't know was that the man she targeted wasn't just any homeowner. He was a seasoned real estate lawyer who had spent years dismantling scams exactly like hers. And when he discovered what she had done, her little stunt turned into the beginning of her own destruction. Before we dive into this wild story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our HOA drama and Karen downfall stories. Smash that like button if you enjoy watching arrogant people get exactly what they deserve, and share this with someone who loves seeing justice served. Now, let's get into it. Chapter 1 began in a picture-perfect suburban community, the kind with neatly trimmed hedges, manicured lawns, and houses that all seemed designed to impress. On the outside, it looked peaceful, but beneath the surface lay a web of power, gossip, and control tightly woven by one woman. Her name was Linda, though most neighbors referred to her simply as Karen. She had blonde hair always tied neatly back, a permanent scowl that made her look perpetually dissatisfied, and a voice sharp enough to cut through glass. Linda wasn't just a member of the HOA board. She had positioned herself as its queen. She controlled fines, she influenced votes, and she took it upon herself to monitor her neighbors for what she called standards violations. But her obsession grew darker when a new homeowner moved in, a successful black man named David Thompson. David wasn't just wealthy enough to afford one of the community's most desirable properties. He was a highly skilled real estate lawyer with a sharp mind and calm demeanor. He had moved into the neighborhood seeking peace, not conflict. He was polite, professional, and well-liked by most neighbors. But to Linda, he was a problem. She didn't like the way his success outshone hers. She didn't like that he never bowed to her fake authority, and she especially didn't like that he knew more about housing law than she did. The tension escalated when David ignored one of Linda's petty violation notices. Instead of planting the exact flowers she suggested, he landscaped his yard tastefully and within HOA guidelines. But Linda wasn't satisfied. She accused him of being non-compliant, sent escalating fines, and when he didn't pay, she decided to strike where she thought it would hurt most. She created a fake real estate listing for David's home, complete with misleading photos and a fabricated price, posting it online as for sale by owner. Her twisted goal was to humiliate David, create confusion, and maybe even drive down the value of his home. Soon, strangers began pulling into David's driveway asking about the listing. Curious neighbors started gossiping. Some even wondered if David was in financial trouble. At first, David was stunned by the chaos, but his years of legal practice had trained him to remain calm under pressure. He quietly investigated, documenting the fraudulent listing, gathering digital evidence, and even tracking the account back to Linda's devices. What she thought was a clever prank had now become a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly back to her. David wasn't going to just remove the listing, he was going to dismantle the woman who had tried to play games with his life. And as neighbors began whispering about the bizarre situation, David started preparing his first counterstrike. The HOA board, smug and dismissive, believed Linda's story that David was overreacting. But David knew how to play the long game. And this was only the beginning of his carefully orchestrated revenge. Chapter 2 opened with the neighborhood buzzing in confusion. More strangers showed up at David's house, some with printouts of the fake listing, others insisting they saw it on major real estate platforms. David remained calm, meeting them at the door, explaining the fraud and taking note of every single incident. Behind closed doors, he worked with his professional contacts, tech experts, realtors, even investigators, to compile an airtight case. He traced the IP address of the fake listing directly to Linda's home computer. He collected screenshots, timestamps, and records from the websites she had used. Every piece of evidence pointed to her. Meanwhile, Linda grew bolder. She told neighbors that David must be in financial trouble if he was pretending not to sell his home. She whispered lies at HOA meetings, painting him as unstable. What she didn't realize was that every word she said was being recorded by a neighbor sympathetic to David's situation. David attended an HOA meeting where Linda tried to shame him publicly, but instead of reacting, he sat calmly, taking notes. He understood that exposing someone like Linda wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. He waited until the right moment, when his evidence was undeniable and her lies had reached their peak. That moment came when one of David's legal contacts informed him that Linda's fraudulent listing had violated multiple state laws, including fraud and defamation statutes. Not only had she broken HOA bylaws, she had committed crimes that carried real consequences. David prepared his case like a military strategist. He had digital forensic reports, witness statements, recordings, and even affidavits from real estate professionals. He wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to destroy Linda's credibility permanently. The final spark came when a young couple, thinking the house was truly for sale, offered money to hold it. When they discovered the fraud, they were furious and agreed to testify. Linda had crossed the line from petty harassment into full-scale criminal activity. David filed formal complaints with state regulators, the Real Estate Commission, and even law enforcement. The storm was gathering, and while Linda smirked at her reflection in the mirror, still believing she had the upper hand, David was already setting the stage for her downfall. The neighbors who once feared Linda's control began quietly shifting. They saw David's calm composure against her erratic gossiping. They noticed how prepared he always seemed, how unshaken by her petty games. Slowly the tide of opinion turned, and by the time Linda realized her empire was crumbling, it was already too late. Chapter 3 erupted inside a crowded courtroom, where David's lawsuit against Linda and the HOA was being heard. The atmosphere was electric, with neighbors filling the seats to witness what many saw as long overdue justice. Linda sat at the defense table, her smug expression faltering as David's lawyers presented a mountain of evidence. First came the digital forensics, IP addresses, timestamps, and screenshots that directly tied the fake listing to Linda's devices. Then came the witnesses, neighbors testifying about Linda's lies, strangers who had driven to David's house, and the young couple who had lost money because of her fraud. Piece by piece, the picture became clear. Linda had abused her position on the HOA to launch a personal vendetta, one that spiraled into criminal fraud. The judge listened intently, his expression growing colder as the evidence piled up. When the recordings of Linda gossiping about David were played, the courtroom murmured in shock. And when the fraudulent listing was displayed on a large screen with her digital fingerprints all over it, even her fellow board members turned pale. David sat calmly throughout, his hands folded, his demeanor professional and unshaken. He had prepared for this moment like a warrior preparing for battle, and it showed. Linda, meanwhile, unraveled. Her attempts to deny responsibility fell flat against the overwhelming evidence. Her lawyers scrambled, but they had nothing. The verdict was swift and devastating. Linda was found liable for fraud, defamation, and harassment. She was ordered to pay massive damages, removed permanently from the HOA board, and referred for possible criminal prosecution. The HOA itself was slapped with fines for failing to supervise her actions, and the judge ordered reforms to prevent such abuse of power in the future. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed David, praising him for standing up not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had ever been bullied by corrupt HOAs. Neighbors who once whispered in fear now approached him with gratitude, thanking him for freeing them from Linda's reign of terror. Linda left the courthouse in disgrace, her head down, her former allies avoiding her gaze. Her reputation was destroyed, her power stripped away, and her arrogance shattered. David, however, returned to his home with a quiet smile. He hadn't just won a case, he had restored dignity to his community. His victory was a reminder that bullies only thrive when people stay silent, and that knowledge and preparation are the greatest weapons against corruption. As the sun set on the neighborhood, it looked more peaceful than it ever had before. The lawns were still green, the sidewalks still clean, but now there was something new in the air. Relief. The neighbors knew that the reign of their HOA Karen was over, and they had David to thank. And David knew one thing for certain: justice, once delivered, is the most powerful revenge of all. If you enjoyed this story of HOA corruption and satisfying justice, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We share new stories every week about people who stood up, fought back, and won against arrogant bullies. Drop a comment with your thoughts below, and share this with a friend who loves seeing justice served. Until next time, stay strong, stay smart, and never let the Karens win.